So it's been a minute, but here we are again, which means Daniel Ricciardo is headed to the job centre. During the Azerbaijan Grand Prix weekend, Helmut Marko reminded us he was still alive by claiming the second RB seat for 2025 will be confirmed following the next race on the calendar in Singapore. Now, whether this information has come from the mouth situated on the Austrian's face, or its counterpart on the guy's rectum isn't clear, but all signs now point to a specific Kiwi taking the Honey Badger's spot alongside Yuki Tsunoda. Ricciardo was brought back to Red Bull for one fairly obvious reason: to give Sergio Perez a kick up the arse and remind him that everybody's replaceable in this game, even if you've just received a 2-year contract extension, it seems. Daniel's triumphant return wasn't to be though, ripping his hand off 3 races in, which paved the way for a young Liam Lawson to stake a serious claim for a spot on the F1 grid. Some are even surprised he didn't get the call up for this year, though things at that stage were already too far along and the team was committed to giving Daniel at least a fighting chance to be the next man in a long line of replacements for Daniel Ricciardo. The start of the season wasn't good. In fact, I think I'd rather slowly castrate myself than watch the opening lap of the Japanese Grand Prix again. Daniel was struggling for pace, while his teammate Warwick Davis was making all the headlines. Not helping matters was the fact that Sergio Perez had also decided to wake up and was doing everything the main Red Bull team wanted him to do, in that he was scoring regular podiums while also failing to challenge Max Verstappen, thus making the Dutchman a very happy boy indeed. Then things began to change. Just like in 2023, Checo got to Miami and decided he couldn't be asked anymore, and in a series of colossal cock-ups took us down the road to where we are now, and Red Bull risked dropping down to as low as 3rd in the constructors' standings this year. Miami also saw changes in Daniel's situation as well. In fact, this really started the race earlier in China, but then, well, I think Checo explains it best.
But the story just happened.
Doesn't matter.
Ricciardo's P4 in the Miami sprint put his name back on the map. Problem was, the following day he found himself behind slow, so a lot of people assumed this to be a mix of fluke and the Miami circuit being a hot pile of shit. Daniel had received a new chassis from the round before in China, and despite RB being adamant there was nothing wrong with the old one, undoubtedly, in some way, this has led to his upturn in form. Don't get me wrong, Ricciardo still wasn't doing anywhere near enough to warrant a spot alongside Sid the Sloth here, but he had elevated his performances to be on the whole, average, which is at least better than what we saw before. Thing was, Sergio Perez was doing his absolute best to make that a conversation anyway, driving so poorly it made 2023 Checo look like Michael Schumacher. Pre-accident, I can't believe you'd think I'd go that downhill. As the summer break got closer and closer, and Checo found all new ways to embarrass Mexico, Ricciardo was at least beginning to beat Tsunoda more regularly. However, RB's upgrades, somehow making the car worse, matched with the team's strategies being dreamt up whilst high, made it difficult to really gauge how competitive either of them were. Regardless, as the teams geared up for the summer shutdown, all signs were pointing to a new name in that Red Bull cockpit when the lights were turned back on. This surprised a lot of people, particularly the town of Woking, who ran out of beer in the early championship celebrations. For Daniel Ricciardo, who was also kept on for the remainder of the year at RB, this was a huge problem. It's rare that I agree with anything that comes remotely close to what comes out of Jacques Villeneuve's mouth, but if Daniel wasn't going to replace Perez, then what exactly was the point of him? Yes, he was one of the most marketable names on the grid, and probably the reason the RB team name is so f***ing stupid. But if you're not putting the performances out there on track, then you can be as marketable as you want. You're not going to find yourself in a race seat for much longer. Since returning from the summer break, Daniel has beaten Yuki in all 3 Grand Prix to date. As much as I'd like to say that's a true reflection of the pair's pace, in reality, Yuki got shafted by strategy in Zandvoort because RB thought you would be able to overtake around there for some reason, and then the 22 car was strolled by Hulkenberg at Monza, then strolled by the Genuine Article and lap 1 at Baku.
But the story just happened.
Doesn't matter.
That Azerbaijan race also saw the triumphant return of Sergio Perez, albeit briefly. However, if he can drive like that for the remainder of the year, it might just be enough to convince the team that he can have his contract extension after all. I still think that's a completely stupid decision, given he's the reason Red Bull won't win the Constructors this year, but Christian Horner also thought he could sext an employee and have no one know about it, so I'm hardly surprised by these guys anymore. That takes us back to Marko's comments in the same Baku weekend, setting a September date for the announcement on who will drive the RB car in 2025. That timing is significant, given the team have until the end of September to guarantee Liam Lawson of a race seat, otherwise he's free to look elsewhere. Elsewhere right now being either Sauber or Formula E for next season. Marko's cryptic remarks follow slightly less cryptic ones, where he basically told everyone Ricciardo is shit and that Lawson will be in a Red Bull car in 2025. Horner has been quick to temper both of these in the media, but even his raging Ricciardo stiffy must realise Lawson presents a much better option from a long-term standpoint. Red Bull have a bottleneck as far as its junior program is concerned. You've obviously got Lawson, but behind him is F2 frontrunner Isaac Hadjar, who, if he wins the title, will not be able to return to that series in 2025. Behind him are a ton of other graduates, names like Arvid Lindblad, who will make the step up to Formula 2 with Campos next year. The team need to quell that backlog, and that means making some very tough decisions. Otherwise, these talents will just end up elsewhere and competing against them in the future. What's strange is this team used to be very good at this, making the then unpopular call to demote Daniel Kvyat for a certain Max Verstappen in 2016. For Ricciardo then, well, the writing's on the wall. So what can the Honey Badger do then? Well, he technically has one last race in Singapore to prove he's worth committing to for 2025. Realistically though, the team's mind is likely already made up on that matter, so even if he somehow manages to score decent points, it's unlikely to shift Marko's opinion. At that stage, he's left with two options. He'll have the remainder of this year to prove he's still worth another shot at Red Bull, all while praying the return of Sergio Perez lasts about as long as Liz Truss's attempt at cosplaying as Prime Minister. His other avenue was to potentially approach the guys at Audi, if he's really that desperate at staying on the F1 grid, that is. Sauber hold the only remaining 2025 seat, and as of right now, Ricciardo doesn't appear to be in the picture. They already have experience locked down with Nico Hülkenberg for next season, and could add to that anyway by making the much easier call of just retaining Valtteri Bottas in the other car, who's quickly becoming just as marketable as Daniel these days anyway. The Aussie's pull of sponsors is not to be scoffed at, however, and he likely would pose at least some consideration were he available on the market. I've said before how I think that would be a fantastic idea for everyone involved, but the chances of it happening are still minuscule at best, and I'm biased to anyway. Sauber have expressed interest in locking down their driver lineup in the near future as well. In fact, it could even be secured before RB make their announcement in a couple of weeks' time. Regardless, if the Honey Badger does decide to show some interest, then they likely wouldn't wait for him to ensure all Red Bull avenues are shut before committing to the project. From Daniel's side, there's also the small matter of this being Sauber, and if I go back to earlier in the year, I think I had some rather choice words to say about wanting to drive for them. Something about rather having cancer. You'll just have to go back and find out for yourself. Ricciardo's options are rapidly closing around him. Looking back, it's almost a miracle the Aussie got his second chance in the first place, and if he does fall off the grid for a second time, there's likely no chance he'll turn a competitive wheel in Formula 1 again. I can see the Honey Badger staying on with Red Bull in his old role of being the circus animal they've rolled out at showruns, setting him up to be the eventual long-term replacement for Willen E here. As for his future in a race seat, well, my videos have aged like before, but I have this lingering feeling this is one of the ones that won't. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below, and where you expect Danny Rick to end up in 2025. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more, drop this vid a like and get subbed to the channel for weekly F1 content. My patrons and channel members got early access to this video, so if that appeals to you and you fancy further supporting the channel, then check out the links in the description down below. I'll be back on the weekend for coverage of the 2024 Singapore Grand Prix, but until then, have a good one.